Welcome, dear viewer, to a spooky anime review brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, especially during this spooky month of October. So today I'm going to give you an anime review of Higurashi, which is a fantastic horror anime, and I want to dive into why that is, and also what it takes to make a good horror story. This is something that we love to do during the month of October, during the month of Halloween, and after finishing the second season of the reboot / conclusion to Higurashi, I want to look at why this is such a great horror anime, and how it's able to pull off something that a lot of people have said couldn't be done. So, real quick, let me get into what Higurashi is and why people say that you can't pull off a good horror anime, which, spoiler alert, you can definitely do it. But first of all, Higurashi is a very, very interesting story where you have this group of friends in a backwater town in Japan, high up in the mountains, and while it might seem like a happy little town on the surface and like these friends just love each other and they're getting along, it's so great, well, they get murdered very violently in a whole lot of ways, and these cycles of death, depression, horror, everything just keeps happening again and again and again. Just because a character dies doesn't mean that they're going to not suffer, because they're going to just come back and relive it again and again in whole new, disgusting, intriguing, horrifying, perplexing, weird ways. Whew! Yeah. So Higurashi follows Kaichi, Rika, Reina, Mion, Shion, and Sakuto. Man, how could I almost forget her name? She's like one of the most important characters. In any case, you have this group of friends who go about on these various adventures. They are members of the little school's gang club. They support each other in their various endeavors revolving around family, fitting in, personal drama, a lot of preteen, teenager stuff that you would expect in a good, like, slice of life drama. In fact, a lot of the story at first seems like a slice of life story until the axe comes out, or until the saw comes out, or until the baseball bat comes out, and then pools of blood just go everywhere. And it's like, bah! What the heck? So basically, Higurashi tries to tackle all of these different personal problems in a very supernatural way. And at the heart of the story, it's that we are our own worst monsters. That it's not just simply even humans, but things like friendship, love, family can be monstrous when put into the wrong situation. So with that really brief overview of Higurashi out of the way, and believe you me, I'm trying to avoid spoilers right here because there's a whole lot that goes into this story. One of the reasons why people believe that you can't pull off a good horror anime, and in fact, really overall, that you can't do animated horror, is because, well, with 2D animation, and even really with computer animation, it's hard to get the same kind of depth with a horror story. Here's one of the things: if you look back at old horror movies, going back almost 100 years, in fact, actually for some of the original horror films, you're actually going back more than 100 years, you'll find out that one of the things that you really need is you need scope, you need depth. The scope and the depth within the screen, or I should say on the screen, allows you to capture a sense of the horrific. Because just like how a lot of people are scared to go into a dark hallway and everything gets obscured and blurred and you're just not sure what's in there, the camera is able to capture that really, really well with live action. It's hard to do that, especially with 2D animation. How do you get that scope, that scale, that depth? But on top of that, a lot of really, really good horror films rely on special kinds of tricks, very practical setups. And the idea is that they're taking something that you can see right in front of you that looks familiar, that looks real, and it becomes twisted, corrupted, turned against you. Your home becomes your prison. The neighbor across the street who looks normal ends up being a serial killer. Or something horrible is happening within your own body, which is flesh and bone. It looks very realistic, very relatable. So this is one of the reasons why animation has a hard time replicating this, because when you see something that is live action, it's very clearly realistic. Even if the horror is totally balls to the walls bonkers, it still has this realistic quality because you're seeing live people. When you see a cartoon or an anime, well, your brain immediately switches to this is fake. And it's hard then to really identify with the characters on screen and see them as real and as relatable. So between these differences of depth and practical effects and then realism, it's hard for cartoons to make up that difference. Where they then have to focus on, what Higurashi does a really fantastic job of doing, is bringing out all of this through very, very simple effects and really, really good writing. So one of the things that Higurashi does is that it takes its time. With every single horrifying arc within the anime, it takes its time to build up the characters. It introduces you to the life of the village. You get to see all these different places. You get to meet all these different kinds of people who have very realistic relationships, very realistic interactions with each other. The characters are dealing with very realistic, real-world problems and issues. And as such, the story, because it takes its time to get you fully invested into each arc, it then grounds you in a sense of realism. So that's what it does. It does excellent job with its writing to create realistic characters and basically tricks your brain to no longer see them as just cartoon characters, but as real people. So check that right there. Now, what the anime does to make up for its lack of practical effects is that instead it focuses on very simple cues to clue the audience in to that something really bad is about to happen. In this case, the chirping of a cicada. Nathan told me at the very beginning when I started watching this that I would come to hate and just be totally terrified at the chirping of any cicada. And that's what ends up happening. Whenever you hear that cicada, you are basically programmed to believe that the worst is happening. And it's so fantastic how the series uses this chirp. Whenever the chirp happens, it doesn't mean that suddenly blood's about to spurt and someone's going to get murdered. No, the chirp clues us in that there's some kind of change going on and that it's not a good change. And you can see it on the screen and you can hear it in the dialogue. And you're like, okay, so something is changing. I get the feeling, I get the sense of foreboding. Something's coming, something bad is coming, but I don't know what, I don't know when. And then boom, it hits you. You get that final chirp and then something awful happens. And after a few arcs of this, oh boy, whenever you hear that chirp, you're like, ah, crud, what am I missing? What's going on? And I should stress right here that the cicadas, once again, they don't always herald that someone's about to die. Instead, they are heralding changes in the story. And that's something that a good horror story does. It reels you in. It gives you these moments where you realize, oh no, something's going to happen, something's going to happen, something's going to happen. This is why jump scares end up being really cheap, because usually jump scares come after just a bit of tension has been built up. A really good horror story can actually use jump scares as those build-up moments where you're just like, okay, I got the jump scare, it doesn't really mean anything, and then boom, something truly horrific happens. And you get totally caught off guard because the story has programmed you to think differently. This is something that is actually very hard to do within a book. It's very easy to do with visual media because you have all of those audio and visual cues. When you're writing something out and you're trying to make it clear that something bad is about to happen or that there are changes, one of the things that you need to do as an author is note either the specific change in the atmosphere, the specific change in the setting, or a specific change within the character that consistently builds up to the horrific reveal later on. Now, the last thing that Higurashi has to somehow try to overcome is the sense of depth, because once again, even though there's actually some really good things that you can do with layering when it comes to animation, you're always going to have that issue with 2D animation that it just feels kind of flat. It takes a lot of work to actually develop any sense of illusion for the depth within any kind of story, whether that be the trees are so far back or this room is so long, stuff like that. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time to make that work. Now, Higurashi, especially these rebooted seasons and the conclusion to the whole story, have been fantastically animated. Some of the earlier stuff, maybe not so much, but they definitely put the budget in for these last 2 seasons. Though the thing is this, is that they don't focus so much now on, ooh, I can create this sense of depth and where is the monster going to come from? Because in this story, it's not some existential monster that is coming to kill the kids. Instead, the kids are the monsters. And so how then can they grasp that sense of depth? I mean, they've already nailed it with making realistic characters. They've already created those horror cues. What they do as far as the depth goes is that when the murders come, they are absolutely just awful. No bars hold. Everything will be shown. And that's the kind of depth that the story goes for. The depth of just how horrific these murders are. Rather than treating it as some bloodfest, which, that's the thing, a lot of horror stories, when they go very bloody, it's all about how much gore can we throw in. Oh, are you disgusted now, Mr. Krabs? No, instead what Higurashi is trying to do is it's trying to horrify you with just how brutal these kids have become by showing you just the fullest extent to what their violence brings. And that is a very interesting artistic choice, because once again, the story's not looking to make you sick with the amount of gore that it can do. Instead, it is showing you to the fullest extent just how monstrous these children have become. That each one who becomes a monster is willing to go this far, become this deranged. And because the horror cues have been building up slowly, you are put onto the edge of your seat, so that way when the murder does come, it has the full horrifying effect. You won't get it if you just Google Higurashi murders and then watch the Bloodfest, in which case you're then going to be like, ha ha ha, look at that, oh, anime, putting an entire Olympic pool's worth of blood into one character, oh, that's so silly, that doesn't work. Obviously it doesn't work. But when you have the entire build-up, those murder scenes become something truly horrifying. So, really quick, to recap, this is what Higurashi does very, very well. It creates very realistic characters. It tricks you into thinking that you're watching a very real story and not just an anime. It then builds up the suspense by using very specific clues within each arc that then build up to finally a murder that fills the entire scope of your vision. Every single inch of the screen becomes splattered with blood and gore to show just how monstrous the murderer has become within this arc, and to fully show just how awful love, family, relationships, ambitions can become when they are turned to more selfish and evil intentions. So that is why I would say that Higurashi is, quite honestly, a fantastic horror anime. Now, as writers, what can we really take away from this? Well, make your characters relatable, make them believable. Sure, it's a lot of fun to have some hokey stuff, some campy stuff into your horror every now and then, because some horrors are not meant to take themselves too seriously, and sometimes that's totally fine. I like a good campy horror flick. I like a good campy horror story. I've come across many of them and I love them. But if you're looking to make something way more heavy and something way more just crushing to your audience, where they're just like, they walk away from it feeling overwhelmed and slightly terrified, which is what you want to do with a really good horror story, then you want to have realistic settings and realistic characters. You then need to build up the suspense with certain cues and clues that tell the audience something is changing, something bad is happening. And then you need to have proper scope for what is going on. Now, as writers, we do not have the benefit of using a screen, of using a camera, of using layers of animation and everything like that. No, we have to basically paint this image in the minds of our audience. So what we have to do is we have to be very careful with our descriptive choices. We have to understand the settings in which we are placing our horror stories. And as you understand the setting, and as you figure out the right words to describe what is going on, you'll be able to perfectly paint the scope of the horror in the minds of your readers. So that's all the advice that I have right now for this video, and Higurashi definitely has my wholehearted recommendation. Go watch it, especially since it is the month of Halloween. If you want a good fright, this anime will do it for you. And if you're looking for more writing advice, then please check out our other videos here on the channel. You can also go check out our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We also have writing exercises over at our Pinterest page, and we would love to have you join us over at our Discord and subreddit, so that way you can join in on all of the conversations that we're having there about our various stories and our struggles as novice writers. Thank you for joining us on this adventure that we call writing, and until the next spooky video, y'all. Tschüss.